Snow covered the frontier town of Black Hollow like a burial cloth. The streets were nearly empty, except for drunken cowboys stumbling between saloons, their boots sinking into mud and slush beneath the weak glow of lanterns. Wind screamed through the valley, shaking old wooden signs and rattling windows across town. But at the far edge of Black Hollow, inside a collapsing cabin, surrounded by dead grass and broken fences, the world was silent. Completely silent. 19-year-old Clara Bell sat beside a tiny oil lamp, sewing a torn shirt with slow, careful movements. Her fingers were red from cold, but she kept working, because winter did not care whether people were tired. And neither did her father. Clara had been deaf since childhood. Some said fever stole her hearing when she was 6. Others claimed God punished the Bell family for old sins. In Black Hollow, people always preferred cruel stories over truthful ones. At first, her mother had protected her. But after her mother died from pneumonia years earlier, everything changed. Her father, Earl Bell, became a different man. A bitter one. A drunk one. The kind of man who blamed the nearest person for every failure in his life. And the nearest person was always Clara. She lowered her eyes toward the fabric in her hands, trying not to think about how empty the cabin felt tonight. A weak fire crackled in the corner, barely strong enough to fight the freezing wind slipping through cracks in the walls. Then suddenly, the floor vibrated beneath her feet. Clara froze. Someone was outside. Heavy footsteps. Unsteady. She knew instantly who it was. Her father. The cabin door burst open violently, slamming against the wall, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Snow blew inside with Earl Bell as he staggered through the doorway, clutching a whiskey bottle. His face was flushed red, his eyes unfocused, drunk again. Clara quickly stood from her chair. Fear moved automatically through her body now, like instinct. Earl shouted something she could not hear. His mouth twisted angrily. She recognized the words anyway. Worthless, lazy, burden. He used them often. Clara lowered her gaze immediately, hoping silence would calm him. But silence only irritated Earl more. He hated that she could not hear his insults, hated that his anger disappeared into emptiness around her. He marched toward the table and slammed his fist down hard enough to make the lamp tremble. Clara flinched. Earl pointed toward the kitchen shelves. Empty. No bread, no meat, nothing. Then he pointed toward himself and began yelling again, blaming her for the hunger, the poverty, the miserable life he had built with his own hands. Tears burned behind Clara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying only made him crueler. Finally, Earl collapsed into a chair, drinking deeply from the bottle while muttering to himself. Clara quietly picked up the torn shirt again and resumed sewing. Invisible, that was how she survived. Invisible girls avoided pain. After several minutes, Earl suddenly stood again and grabbed his coat. Clara's stomach tightened. He was leaving, going back to town, back to gambling. The whiskey already hanging heavily in his movements meant tonight would end badly. It always did when he mixed alcohol with cards. Before leaving, Earl pointed a finger at her sharply. Even without hearing, Clara understood perfectly. Stay here. Then he disappeared into the storm. The cabin became still again. Clara stared toward the closed door for a long moment, before slowly sitting beside the fire. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and reached for the small notebook hidden beneath the table. It was the only place where she could speak freely. She opened to a blank page. Her pencil hovered uncertainly before she finally wrote, "Does anyone in this world truly see me?" The question hurt more once it existed on paper. Clara quickly closed the notebook and held it against her chest. Outside, snow continued falling endlessly across Black Hollow. Across town, the Silver Spur Saloon overflowed with smoke, whiskey, and loud laughter. Cowboys crowded poker tables, while piano music echoed through the building. Women in bright dresses moved between drunken men carrying bottles and glasses. At the largest table near the back sat Earl Bell, and tonight luck had abandoned him completely. Cards slipped through his trembling fingers as sweat rolled down his forehead. Across from him sat 3 rough cattle traders from Montana, hard-faced men with revolvers strapped openly at their waists. One of them smirked while collecting another pile of Earl's money. "That all you got left?" Earl swallowed hard. "I can pay." "With what?" Another man laughed. Earl glanced at the nearly empty bottle beside him, then toward the saloon doors. Desperation slowly darkened his face. "There's my daughter." The men burst into laughter. "Your daughter?" Earl nodded drunkenly. "Pretty enough. Works hard, too." "Thought you said she was deaf." "She is." The cowboy laughed harder. "Might actually be useful then." The table erupted with cruel amusement, but in the far corner of the saloon, one man did not laugh. Nathaniel Reed sat alone beside the window, his large hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. 38 years old, quiet, broad-shouldered, a rancher from the mountains beyond Wyoming Valley. Most people in Black Hollow avoided Nathaniel because grief lived visibly inside him. 7 years earlier, sickness had taken his wife and infant son within the same winter. Since then, he rarely spoke more than necessary. Some called him cold, others called him haunted. Nathaniel preferred being left alone. But tonight, Earl's words reached him through the noise. "She's basically useless to me anyway," Earl muttered. Nathaniel slowly lifted his eyes. Something sharp entered his expression. At the poker table, the Montana traders exchanged amused looks. "Well then," one said, "bring the girl here." Nearly an hour later, Earl stumbled through the snow toward home. Clara looked up the moment he entered the cabin again. One glance at his face filled her with dread. He had lost, badly. Without warning, Earl grabbed her arm roughly and dragged her toward the door. Clara resisted instantly. Fear exploded inside her chest. She signed desperately with trembling hands. "Where are we going?" Earl ignored her completely. Snow whipped across their faces as he pulled her through the streets toward the glowing saloon. People stared openly from windows and porches. Clara's heart pounded harder with every step. When they entered the Silver Spur, chaos surrounded her instantly. Though she could not hear the music or shouting voices, she felt the vibrations beneath the wooden floor. Men turned to stare. Some smirked. Others whispered. Clara instinctively stepped backward. Then one of the traders approached her slowly. He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her face upward beneath the lantern light. Humiliation burned through her entire body. The men laughed. Earl laughed too. Clara jerked away, breathing unevenly as tears filled her eyes. And then, a chair scraped sharply across the floor. The laughter slowly faded. Nathaniel Reed stood up. Even across the crowded saloon, his presence changed the atmosphere immediately. He was taller than most men there, his dark coat dusted with melted snow, his expression unreadable. One of the traders sneered. "Got a problem, rancher?" Nathaniel ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at Clara. Really looked at her. Not like an object, not like a joke, like a frightened human being. And for one strange moment, Clara felt seen. Nathaniel stepped toward the bar calmly. "How much does he owe?" he asked. The bartender hesitated before answering. Murmurs spread through the saloon. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather pouch filled with coins. He placed it heavily onto the counter. Enough money to erase the debt completely. Silence spread across the room. Earl's eyes widened greedily. "Well," one trader laughed, "looks like the girl belongs to you now." Clara felt like the ground disappeared beneath her feet. Belongs. The word crushed something inside her. Take her. Tears slipped down Clara's face instantly. Her own father had sold her. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, truly sold her. Like cattle, like property, like she meant nothing at all. Nathaniel walked toward her carefully. Clara stepped backward in fear. But unlike the others, he did not touch her, did not grab her arm, did not smile cruelly. Instead, he slowly removed a folded piece of paper from his pocket and wrote something across it. Then he handed it gently to her. Clara looked down. "You are safe." Her breath caught. For years, people had spoken around her, mocked her, pitied her, ignored her, but no one had ever tried speaking to her with kindness. Her shaking eyes slowly lifted toward Nathaniel. There was sadness inside his face, loneliness too, the kind only broken people recognized in each other. Nathaniel removed his heavy winter coat and offered it to her. After a long hesitation, Clara accepted it silently. Outside, snow continued falling beneath the dark Wyoming sky, as Nathaniel guided her carefully toward his wagon. The horses began moving slowly away from Black Hollow, away from her old life. Clara sat stiffly beside him, clutching her notebook tightly while fear twisted inside her chest. She did not know this man, did not know where he was taking her, or why he had saved her. But as the wagon rolled through the silent mountains, Clara noticed something strange. Nathaniel kept glancing toward her carefully, not like a man who had bought something, but like a lonely soul, terrified of hurting another lonely soul. The journey through the mountains lasted nearly all night. Snow covered the narrow trails, while icy winds swept across the empty Wyoming wilderness. Clara sat silently beside Nathaniel Reed in the wagon, wrapped tightly in the heavy coat he had given her. She did not sleep once. Fear kept her awake. Every time the horses slowed, her heart pounded harder. She had heard enough stories from frightened women in town to know what cruel men were capable of behind closed doors. And now she was alone with a stranger who had bought her. Nathaniel rarely looked at her during the journey. His hand stayed firmly on the wagon reins, while snow collected across his dark hat and shoulders. The only sound Clara could feel was the constant vibration of wooden wheels against frozen earth. Hours later, just before dawn, the wagon finally reached the ranch. Clara stared silently as it emerged through the storm. It was larger than she expected. A wide wooden house stood near several barns, surrounded by fences stretching endlessly across white fields. Horses moved through the snow beneath lantern light, their breath rising in soft clouds. The mountains towered behind everything like silent guardians. Lonely, beautiful, cold. Nathaniel climbed down first and tied the horses carefully before turning toward Clara. He hesitated, as though unsure how to comfort frightened people anymore. Then he extended his hand. Not demanding, offering. Clara stared at it cautiously before slowly accepting. His hands were rough and warm. Nathaniel guided her toward the house, opening the front door quietly. Warmth rushed over Clara instantly. A fire burned inside the stone fireplace. The scent of wood smoke and coffee filled the air. Unlike the cabin she grew up in, this house felt alive. Not happy, but lived in. Nathaniel picked up a lantern and led her down a short hallway toward a small room beside the kitchen. When Clara stepped inside, confusion crossed her face. A clean bed waited beneath folded blankets. Fresh clothes rested neatly on a chair. A small vase held dried wildflowers beside the window. And most importantly, no locks. Nathaniel set the lantern down gently before pulling a folded paper from his pocket again. He wrote slowly, "This room is yours." Clara read the sentence twice. Yours. Not temporary, not borrowed. Yours. Nathaniel continued writing. "You can sleep safely here." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Safe. She barely remembered what that word felt like. Nathaniel placed the note beside the lantern and stepped backward toward the door, giving her space. Before leaving, he wrote one final sentence. "If you need anything, knock on my door." Then he disappeared quietly down the hallway. Clara stood motionless for a long time. This had to be a trick, Kindness always became cruelty eventually. She knew that. Still, exhaustion finally pulled her onto the bed. The mattress softened beneath her body, startling her slightly. She had spent years sleeping on thin blankets over hard wooden floors. But tonight, for the first time since childhood, Clara slept in warmth, and no one screamed at her. Morning arrived slowly across the ranch. Golden sunlight reflected across endless snowfields, while horses moved peacefully beyond the windows. Clara awoke suddenly, confused by the unfamiliar silence surrounding her. No drunken shouting, no broken furniture, no fear. She sat upright carefully. Part of her still expected Earl Bell to burst through the door at any moment. But the ranch remained peaceful. After dressing quietly, Clara stepped into the hallway. The smell of breakfast drifted through the house. Nathaniel stood near the stove, cooking eggs awkwardly in a cast-iron pan. Judging by the burnt edges, he was not especially talented in the kitchen. When he noticed Clara, he nearly dropped the pan in surprise. Clearly, he was not used to sharing space with another person. Nathaniel quickly grabbed a notebook from the table and wrote, "Good morning." Clara nodded shyly. He pointed toward a chair beside the fire. "Hungry?" After a small hesitation, she sat. Nathaniel served breakfast carefully, almost nervously. The silence between them was not hostile, only uncertain. Two strangers carrying different kinds of loneliness sat across from one another while snow fell quietly outside. At one point, Nathaniel accidentally burned his hand on the pan. Clara instinctively smiled. A real smile. Small, quick, but real. Nathaniel froze slightly after seeing it, because it transformed her entire face. For the first time since arriving, Clara noticed something inside him soften too. That day, Nathaniel showed her around the ranch. There were cattle barns, horse stables, storage sheds, and endless open land stretching toward the mountains. Workers occasionally visited during busy seasons, but most of the ranch was managed by Nathaniel alone. He preferred it that way. People in town described him as cold. But Clara noticed the truth quickly. He was not cold. He was grieving. There was a difference. Over the next several days, Clara slowly adjusted to ranch life. She cleaned rooms, organized supplies, repaired torn clothes, and cooked meals far better than Nathaniel ever could. And slowly, the empty house began feeling less empty. At first, they communicated only through written notes. Nathaniel's handwriting was rough, but thoughtful. Clara's was elegant and careful. Sometimes entire conversations passed silently across scraps of paper. One evening while folding laundry, Clara accidentally discovered a small wooden box hidden inside a closet. Curious, she opened it carefully. Inside rested tiny baby shoes, a woman's scarf, and several faded photographs. Clara picked one up gently. It showed a younger Nathaniel smiling beside a beautiful woman with bright eyes. In her arms, she held a baby wrapped in blankets. Happiness glowed across all three faces. Clara's chest tightened. She had never seen Nathaniel smile like that. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind her. Nathaniel. He froze after seeing the photograph in her hands. Pain crossed his face instantly. Not anger. Pain. Clara quickly lowered the picture apologetically. But Nathaniel slowly stepped forward and sat beside her on the floor. After a long silence, he reached for the notebook nearby. They were my family. His writing trembled slightly. My wife Mary. He paused before continuing. And my son Jacob. Clara looked back at the photograph carefully. Nathaniel stared toward the floor for several long seconds before writing again. They died during the fever 7 winters ago. The words felt heavy, even without sound. Clara gently touched the corner of the photograph. Nathaniel continued. After that, I stopped speaking much. He gave a bitter half-smile. People stopped trying, too. Clara understood that feeling completely. Being alone too long changed people. It hollowed them from the inside. For the first time, she realized Nathaniel's silence resembled her own. Not empty, wounded. That night Clara could not stop thinking about him. The lonely rancher everyone feared. The man who carried grief like a shadow behind his eyes. The man who bought her only to give her freedom. Days slowly turned into weeks. Winter softened. Snow began melting across the valley. And something unexpected happened inside the ranch. Life returned. Nathaniel started smiling more often. Not large smiles, small ones, careful ones, but real. Clara noticed he no longer ate meals alone. Sometimes he lingered beside the kitchen doorway just to watch her cooking quietly. Other times he left little gifts outside her room without explanation. A new pair of gloves, fresh pencils for her notebook, wildflowers gathered from beneath the snow. He never spoke about these gestures, but Clara understood them anyway. One afternoon while working near the stables, Clara noticed a black stallion violently kicking against its fence. The horse snapped at anyone who approached. Nathaniel signed quickly for her to stay back. The horse was named Midnight. Wild, dangerous, broken by previous owners who abused him badly. But instead of fear, Clara felt recognition. She stepped slowly toward the stallion, despite Nathaniel's alarm. Midnight thrashed violently. Clara remained calm, because she understood what it meant to live terrified of human hands. Carefully, she reached forward. The stallion snorted angrily at first. Then slowly, miraculously, it lowered its head. Nathaniel stared in shock as Clara gently touched the horse's face. Midnight became still beneath her hands, like he finally felt understood. That was the moment Nathaniel realized something dangerous. He had begun falling in love with her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she needed saving, but because Clara carried gentleness without weakness. Because despite everything the world had done to her, she remained kind. And Nathaniel had almost forgotten kindness existed. A few days later they rode into Black Hollow for supplies. The moment townspeople saw Clara beside Nathaniel, whispers spread quickly through the streets. The deaf girl. The rancher bought her. Strange pair. Clara lowered her eyes uncomfortably while walking toward the general store. Then 3 drunken cowboys blocked her path. One mocked sign language with exaggerated hand gestures, while the others laughed cruelly. Another leaned close enough for Clara to smell whiskey on his breath. "Can she understand anything?" he sneered. Humiliation flooded through her instantly. She tried stepping away. The cowboy grabbed her wrist. And suddenly, a powerful hand seized the man's collar from behind. Nathaniel. The entire street fell silent. Nathaniel shoved the cowboy backward, hard enough to send him crashing into the mud. "What's your problem?" Nathaniel pulled a pencil and paper from his coat. He wrote something quickly before slamming it against the man's chest. "She is not property." The cowboy's face darkened, but one look into Nathaniel's eyes convinced him not to continue. The men backed away, muttering curses. Clara stood frozen. No one had ever defended her before. Not once in her life. Nathaniel turned toward her immediately, concern filling his expression. "Are you all right?" Clara could barely breathe, because for the first time, someone had chosen her dignity over their own comfort. That night, heavy rain fell across the ranch roof, while thunder flashed beyond the mountains. Clara sat beside the fireplace, unable to stop replaying the moment in town. Nathaniel quietly repaired a saddle nearby, beneath lantern light. The house glowed warm against the storm outside. And somewhere deep inside both lonely souls, something fragile had finally begun to heal. Spring arrived slowly across Wyoming Valley. Snow disappeared from the hills first, revealing patches of green grass beneath the melting ice. Rivers swelled with fresh mountain water, birds returned to the valleys, and warm sunlight finally touched the lonely Reed Ranch again. But the greatest change happened inside the house itself. For years, silence there had felt heavy. Now, it felt peaceful. Clara moved through the kitchen early each morning, preparing breakfast, while sunlight poured through the windows. Nathaniel often pretended to work nearby longer than necessary, just to watch her quietly humming soundless melodies to herself. He still spoke very little. But around Clara, he no longer seemed afraid of living, and Clara no longer seemed afraid of existing. Some wounds healed slowly, others healed in silence. One warm afternoon, Clara stood near the horse pens, brushing Midnight's dark coat, while the stallion rested calmly beside her. Months earlier the horse had nearly killed anyone who approached him. Now he followed Clara everywhere. Nathaniel leaned against the fence, watching them with amusement. He wrote something on a small piece of paper before handing it to her. "I think he loves you more than me." Clara laughed softly. Not a sound exactly, more like breath wrapped in happiness. Nathaniel found himself staring longer than he should, because every day Clara became harder not to love. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair across her face, while sunlight touched her skin. She looked peaceful beside the horse, like someone the world tried to destroy, but somehow failed. Clara noticed him staring. Nathaniel quickly looked away. Too late. A faint blush warmed her cheeks. For the rest of the afternoon, neither of them could meet the other's eyes for very long. That evening, Clara sat alone on the porch steps, watching sunsets spill gold across the valley. The mountains looked endless beneath the fading sky. Beautiful, quiet, safe. She still struggled, believing this life belonged to her. Sometimes she woke expecting to find herself back inside her father's cabin, back inside fear. But then she would see Nathaniel nearby, repairing fences or carrying firewood, and reality would return gently. A strange warmth settled inside her chest whenever he appeared. Not gratitude anymore. Something deeper. Something dangerous. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Nathaniel sat beside her on the porch, leaving respectful space between them. For several moments, they simply watched the sunset together. Then Nathaniel handed her another folded note. "I used to hate evenings." Clara looked toward him curiously. He continued writing. "After Mary died, nighttime felt empty." His jaw tightened slightly. "But now it doesn't." Clara's heartbeat quickened. Nathaniel stared out toward the valley, while writing the final sentence slowly. "You brought life back here." Her eyes softened instantly. No one had ever needed her before. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered. Clara carefully took the pencil from his hand. Then she wrote beneath his words, "You brought life back to me too." Nathaniel read the sentence twice, then once more. Emotion flickered visibly across his face, before he slowly folded the paper and placed it inside his coat pocket like something precious. That night neither of them slept much, because love had finally entered the ranch. Quietly, gently, and both were terrified of it. Days passed. The connection between them deepened in ways neither fully understood. Clara began recognizing Nathaniel's moods before he expressed them. She knew when grief returned to his thoughts, knew when exhaustion weighed heavily on him, knew when hidden sadness lived behind his eyes, even if he smiled. And strangely, sometimes she felt something else too, a rhythm. Whenever Nathaniel stood very close, Clara occasionally sensed faint vibrations inside her chest. At first, she ignored it. Then it happened again, and again. It made no sense. She was deaf, completely deaf. Yet around Nathaniel, something inside her responded to him in ways she could not explain. One evening, dark storm clouds rolled across the mountains unexpectedly. Heavy rain hammered the ranch, while fierce winds shook the barns. Nathaniel rushed outside to secure the horses before the storm worsened. Clara watched nervously from the doorway. Lightning flashed violently overhead. The horses panicked inside the stable. Nathaniel climbed a ladder near the barn roof, trying to secure loose wood before the wind tore it away. Then suddenly, a loud crack of lightning split the sky. The horses reared wildly. The ladder shifted, and Nathaniel fell. Clara gasped silently as his body slammed hard against the muddy ground below. For one horrifying second he did not move. Fear exploded through her entire body. She ran across the rain-soaked yard as fast as she could, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood trickled from a cut near his forehead, while rain drenched his clothes. Nathaniel's eyes remained closed. Panic consumed her. Clara grabbed his shoulders desperately, shaking him gently. "Please wake up. Please." Then suddenly, she felt it. Thump. Her entire body froze. Thump. A faint rhythm pulsed beneath her hands. Nathaniel's heart beat. Clara's eyes widened in shock. For years the world had been silent. Yet somehow, holding him close beneath the storm, she could feel the sound of his life echoing through her chest. Strong, steady, real. Tears filled her eyes instantly. She pressed closer, overwhelmed by the impossible sensation. Thump, thump, thump. Not through ears, through heart. Clara somehow heard him. She quickly dragged Nathaniel toward the house with desperate strength, fueled entirely by fear. By the time she managed to pull him inside near the fireplace, her entire body trembled violently. Nathaniel slowly opened his eyes several minutes later. The first thing he saw was Clara crying beside him. Real tears. Terrified tears. He tried sitting up immediately, but pain shot through his shoulder. Clara quickly pushed him back down carefully. Nathaniel blinked in confusion before noticing blood on her hands from his injury. He reached toward her face gently, and that was when he saw it. She was shaking. Not from fear for herself, fear for him. Nathaniel's chest tightened painfully. He had not mattered this deeply to another person in years. Clara hurried to clean his wound while the storm raged outside. Throughout the night, she stayed beside him, refusing to leave, even after he insisted through written notes that he was all right. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her. Nathaniel awoke sometime after midnight to find Clara asleep beside his bed, her hands still holding his tightly. He stared at her for a very long time, then carefully brushed loose hair from her face. Something inside him broke completely at that moment. Not painfully, beautifully. Because after years of believing his heart died alongside his family, he realized it still lived, and it belonged entirely to her now. The following morning, sunlight streamed softly through the windows after the storm passed. Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table, while Clara prepared coffee nearby. Neither seemed capable of speaking through notes this morning. The air between them felt too full, too fragile. Finally, Nathaniel stood slowly and approached her. Clara turned toward him nervously. He pulled out his notebook carefully, then wrote, "I need to tell you something." Her pulse quickened instantly. Nathaniel stared at the page for several seconds before continuing. "The night I met you." His hand paused. "I didn't pay your father because I wanted to own you." Clara watched him silently. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I did it because I saw fear in your eyes." Another pause. "And I couldn't leave you there." Emotion filled Clara's chest painfully. Nathaniel wrote one final sentence. "You are free to leave whenever you want." The words shattered her completely. Because no one had ever offered her freedom before. No one had ever loved her enough to let her choose. Clara slowly took the pencil from his trembling hand. Then she wrote carefully beneath his words, "I stopped feeling alone when I met you." Nathaniel stared at the sentence. His breathing became uneven. Clara looked up slowly. Their eyes met, and suddenly every silent moment between them said more than words ever could. Nathaniel lifted his hand carefully toward her face, giving her time to move away. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek softly. Clara closed her eyes instinctively beneath his touch. Then gently, tenderly, Nathaniel kissed her. The world seemed to stop. Rainwater still dripped softly from the roof outside, while morning sunlight wrapped around them like warmth after endless winter. For Clara, the kiss felt louder than thunder, because somehow, in the silence surrounding Nathaniel Reed, she had finally begun hearing life again. Summer settled gently over Wyoming Valley. Golden sunlight rolled across endless grasslands, while warm winds carried the scent of wildflowers through the mountains. The Reed Ranch no longer felt lonely. It felt alive. Laughter now existed there. Not loud laughter, soft laughter, the kind built from healing hearts. Every morning, Clara woke before sunrise, beside the bedroom window overlooking the ranch. She loved watching Nathaniel work before the world fully awakened. He moved across the fields with quiet confidence, mending fences, feeding horses, carrying water beneath the pale morning sky. And every time he looked toward the house, he smiled. A real smile, one meant only for her. Clara still struggled, believing this life was real. Some nights, she would touch the wedding band, now resting gently on her finger, just to remind herself she had not imagined everything. 3 weeks earlier, Nathaniel had asked her to marry him. Not with grand speeches, not with dramatic promises, just honesty. He had taken her hands beneath the old oak tree near the barn, and written carefully inside his notebook, "I do not know how to live without you anymore." Clara cried before she even finished reading. Their wedding happened quietly at the ranch, beneath open skies and mountain wind. A traveling pastor from the nearby town performed the ceremony, while a few ranch workers stood nearby, smiling warmly. Nathaniel looked at Clara during the vows like she was the greatest miracle God ever created. And Clara, the silent girl nobody wanted, finally belonged somewhere. But peace never remains untouched forever. One scorching afternoon, Clara stood near the garden gathering vegetables when she noticed dust rising far beyond the ranch road. A wagon approached quickly. Her smile faded instantly. Even from a distance, she recognized the shape of the man driving it. Earl Bell, her father. Fear hit her so suddenly that she nearly dropped the basket in her hands. Months had passed since she last saw him inside the saloon. Months since he sold her like property. Yet one glimpse of him dragged every terrible memory rushing back. The wagon stopped violently near the house. Earl climbed down drunk, dirty, and furious. 2 rough-looking men carrying rifles stepped down beside him. Nathaniel emerged from the barn immediately after hearing the commotion. The moment he saw Earl, his expression darkened. Clara instinctively stepped backward. Earl staggered forward, pointing at her aggressively while shouting. Though Clara could not hear the words clearly, she understood enough from his face. Accusations, blame, anger. Nathaniel moved between them instantly, protective, steady. Earl sneered at him. "That girl still belongs to me," he spat. Nathaniel's jaw tightened dangerously. "No," he answered coldly. "She never did." One of the armed men laughed. "Careful, rancher." Nathaniel ignored him completely. Earl stepped closer, whiskey staining his breath and clothes. "You think paying my debt made her your wife?" he spat. "You want her so badly. Pay me more." Clara felt physically sick. Even now, even after everything, her father still saw her as something to sell. Nathaniel's eyes hardened with fury Clara had never seen before. "I already paid more than you deserved," Earl smirked cruelly. "Then maybe I'll just take her back." The 2 armed men shifted slightly behind him, threatening, dangerous. Nathaniel immediately stepped fully in front of Clara, shielding her. Fear and rage collided inside Clara's chest. She hated how small her father still made her feel. Hated that one look from him could drag her back into helplessness. Nathaniel spoke slowly, dangerously calm. "Leave this ranch." Earl laughed bitterly. "Or what?" Without warning, one of Earl's men lunged forward and shoved Nathaniel hard. Everything exploded instantly. Nathaniel struck the man with a brutal punch, powerful enough to send him crashing into the dirt. The second man swung his rifle toward Nathaniel, but Nathaniel grabbed it mid-motion and slammed him against the wagon. Chaos consumed the ranch yard. Clara stood frozen in horror. Nathaniel fought like a man protecting his entire world, because he was. Earl suddenly grabbed Clara's arm violently during the struggle. Old terror flooded through her body. His fingers dug painfully into her skin as he dragged her backward. "You ungrateful girl," he screamed. Clara panicked instantly, struggling desperately against him. Nathaniel turned after hearing the movement. Earl struck him across the face with the whiskey bottle. Glass shattered. Nathaniel collapsed hard into the mud. Blood streaked across his forehead. Everything stopped inside Clara. Nathaniel wasn't moving. Fear, unlike anything she had ever known, tore through her chest. Earl continued pulling her backward, shouting angrily. But Clara no longer saw him. All she saw was Nathaniel lying motionless on the ground. The man who gave her safety. The man who loved her gently. The man who taught her silence could still hold warmth. Something inside her broke. Not weakly, violently. And for the first time in years, sound escaped her throat. "Stop!" The word ripped through the air, raw and uneven. Everyone froze, even Clara herself. Her eyes widened in shock. She had spoken, actually spoken. Nathaniel slowly lifted his head from the ground, staring at her in disbelief. Earl released her arm immediately, as though burned. Clara trembled violently. Another sound struggled upward painfully through years of silence. Her voice cracked harshly from disuse. Her face. Earl stared at her like he had seen a ghost. Clara looked directly at him for the first time in her life, without fear. Then slowly, painfully, she forced out the words, "I am not yours." The world fell completely still. Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears instantly, because he understood what this moment cost her. Every year of fear, every wound, every silence. Clara's body shook uncontrollably after speaking, but she did not look away from Earl. Not anymore. For the first time, her father saw strength instead of weakness inside his daughter, and it terrified him. Earl stepped backwards slowly. The drunken rage inside his face collapsed into something uglier. Shame. Real shame. He looked toward Nathaniel bleeding in the dirt, toward Clara standing beside him, toward the life he destroyed with his own cruelty. Then, without another word, Earl turned away. The two injured men scrambled after him quickly. Within moments the wagon disappeared down the ranch road beneath a cloud of dust. Gone. Clara's knees nearly gave out from shock. Nathaniel immediately pushed himself up, despite the blood running down his face. He crossed the yard quickly and caught Clara before she collapsed completely. She buried herself against his chest, trembling uncontrollably. Nathaniel held her tightly. Safe, protected, loved. Clara cried harder than she ever had before, because for the first time in her life, her voice belonged to her. Hours later, after cleaning Nathaniel's injuries, Clara sat quietly beside the bedroom window, wrapped in blankets. The sunset painted gold across the valley outside. Nathaniel approached slowly, carrying his notebook. But before he could write anything, Clara spoke first, very softly. "Nathaniel." Her voice sounded fragile and strained, but real. Nathaniel froze completely. Tears filled his eyes immediately. Clara smiled shakily through her exhaustion. He crossed the room in seconds and knelt beside her chair, gently holding her face in both hands like something sacred. "You spoke," he whispered. Clara nodded weakly. For you. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed. Then he rested his forehead against hers. And in that quiet room, filled with fading sunlight and healing hearts, the silent girl finally understood something beautiful. Love had not only rescued her life, it had given her back her voice. Autumn arrived across Wyoming Valley, wrapped in gold. The mountains blazed with color beneath endless blue skies, while cool winds carried fallen leaves across the Reed Ranch. Horses ran freely through open fields. Smoke curled warmly from the chimney each evening, and laughter now lived permanently inside the once lonely house. Years had passed since the winter night Nathaniel Reed brought Clara home, but neither of them ever forgot it, because that night had saved them both. The ranch had changed in ways even the townspeople noticed. Travelers passing through Black Hollow often spoke about the Reed property now, not because of its cattle, not because of its horses, but because warmth seemed to exist there. Real warmth, the kind broken people search for their entire lives. And at the center of it all stood Clara Reed, the silent girl nobody once wanted. Now she moved across the ranch with confidence and peace, her long dark hair catching golden sunlight, while children chased her laughing through the fields. Yes, children. 2 of them. A little boy named Samuel and a 6-year-old daughter named Ellie, who had inherited Nathaniel's thoughtful eyes and Clara's gentle soul. Ellie especially adored horses. Every morning she followed Clara through the stables, carrying tiny brushes much too big for her hands, while asking endless questions Nathaniel pretended not to hear from nearby. The sound of their daughter's laughter often stopped him in place, because years earlier Nathaniel truly believed joy had died forever. Now it ran barefoot through his ranch, wearing little brown boots. One chilly evening, Clara stood beside the pasture fence, watching Samuel attempt to climb onto Midnight, now an aging but loyal black stallion. The horse patiently tolerated the child's terrible balance. Clara smiled softly. Nathaniel approached beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. His dark hair now carried traces of silver near the temples. But Clara somehow loved him even more with age. Maybe because time had softened the sadness once living inside him. Or maybe because every wrinkle near his eyes came from smiling now. He handed her a cup carefully, before wrapping one arm around her waist. The valley stretched beautifully before them, beneath the orange glow of sunset. Peaceful, complete. Nathaniel kissed her temple gently. "You're thinking again," he murmured. Clara glanced toward him with amusement. Years earlier, speaking had felt impossible for her. Her voice remained softer than most people's, and sometimes certain words still came difficult. But Nathaniel listened to every syllable like treasure. Always patiently, always proudly. "I remember things sometimes," Clara admitted quietly. Nathaniel understood immediately. Black Hollow, her father, the fear. Though years passed, some memories never fully disappeared. Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to carry them alone anymore." Clara leaned into him silently. That was the miracle of Nathaniel Reed. He never tried erasing her pain. He simply stood beside her while she healed. Across the pasture, Ellie suddenly lost balance and tumbled into the grass dramatically. Nathaniel laughed instantly, while Clara covered her mouth, trying not to smile too hard. Their daughter stood up furiously, blaming the horse for her own clumsiness, while Samuel laughed uncontrollably nearby. Clara watched her children beneath the fading sunlight, and felt tears quietly rise in her eyes. For so many years, she believed her life would end in silence and loneliness. Now love surrounded her everywhere she looked. Later that night the family gathered around the fireplace, while rain tapped gently against the windows. Samuel slept curled beside the rug with one of the ranch dogs, while Ellie rested against Clara's shoulder, fighting sleep stubbornly. Nathaniel sat nearby, repairing a saddle beneath lantern light. It was such an ordinary moment. Yet Clara loved ordinary moments most, because she once believed peace only existed in dreams. Ellie finally looked toward her mother sleepily. "Mama? Yes? Were you really deaf before?" The question made the room quiet. Nathaniel slowly lifted his eyes. Clara smiled gently at her daughter. "I still am, a little." Ellie frowned in confusion. "But you hear me." Clara touched her daughter's cheek softly. "I hear differently." Ellie considered this seriously. Then she asked the question Nathaniel already knew was coming. "How did you know Papa loved you?" Nathaniel nearly stabbed himself with the repair needle. Clara laughed softly while he pretended sudden interest in the saddle. But Ellie waited patiently. Clara looked toward Nathaniel for a long moment before answering. "Because," she whispered, "I could hear his heart." Nathaniel's hands stopped moving. Even after all these years, those words still affected him deeply. "Really?" Clara nodded. "When someone loves you truly, sometimes your heart hears them before your ears do." Ellie seemed satisfied with that explanation. Within minutes, she fell asleep curled against Clara's side. Nathaniel quietly carried their daughter upstairs, while Clara tucked blankets around Samuel beside the fire. The ranch grew peaceful again. Rain continued outside, while lantern light flickered softly across the room. When Nathaniel returned downstairs, he found Clara standing near the window, watching the storm. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, automatically. Home. That was what she felt like. Home. "You're quiet tonight," he whispered. Clara rested her hands over his. "I was thinking about the first night I came here." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "You looked ready to stab me with that notebook." She laughed softly. "I was terrified." "I know." Clara turned slowly within his arms. "You saved me." Nathaniel shook his head immediately. "No." His voice deepened with emotion. "We saved each other." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Even now, after years together, Nathaniel still looked at her like she was something precious the world nearly destroyed. He brushed loose hair gently from her face. "Do you know what I remember most from that winter?" he asked quietly. Clara shook her head. "The silence." She blinked softly. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Not lonely silence. Peaceful silence." He rested his forehead against hers. For the first time after Mary died, the house didn't feel empty anymore. Clara's chest tightened painfully with love. Nathaniel reached into his pocket slowly, before pulling out something worn and folded with age. An old piece of paper. The very first note he ever gave her. "You are safe." Clara stared at it silently, while tears slipped down her cheeks. Nathaniel had carried it all these years. Carefully, Clara took the note into her hands. Then she whispered the words back to him. "So are you." Outside, rain fell softly across Wyoming Valley, while wind moved through the mountains, exactly as it had the night they first met. But the ranch no longer carried loneliness inside its walls. Only warmth, only family, only love. And later, long after the lanterns dimmed and the storm faded into the distance, Clara rested beside Nathaniel in the quiet darkness of their room. Her head lay against his chest, and there it was again. Thump, thump, thump. The steady heartbeat she had somehow heard long before she understood why it mattered. Strong, gentle, constant. Clara closed her eyes peacefully, because after a lifetime of silence, cruelty, and abandonment, she had finally found the one sound her soul was always meant to hear. The lonely rancher's heart, calling her home forever.